Bom dia a todos, a todas.
Bom dia.
Bom dia.
Bom dia, Elisa. Bom dia.
Bom dia.
Ainda não apareceu sua imagem, mas...
Yes. We are on YouTube.
Uhul.
Good. 1 minute to start.
Ao vivo agora.
Agora que eu escutei o teu yes, Elaine.
Delay. 1 minute to start.
Agora que eu escutei o teu yes.
Tá com delay. Eu vou ter que ver o que eu faço com os meus áudios aqui.
Mas eu acho que o delay é natural.
Não, é que eu estou
como
conectada.
impedir.
Eu estou
entendi.
conectada nos dois lugares.
Você tem que sair de um.
É dar o eco, né? Se acontecer de ficar nos lugares.
Ah, Ariel, agora estou vendo você.
Gente, eu perdi aquela tela que tem todo mundo. O que será que aconteceu?
Gallery
ok.
view.
Yeah.
Well, it's 9 o'clock. I think we should start.
Shall we?
British time. How about that, Ligeia?
Okay.
We have to teach people to be on time.
Yeah, Stella. So you open the ceremony, and then I follow you. Okay. I introduce Ligeia, and I welcome her to be our guest speaker. So
Okay.
you, please, you go
I have
ahead.
not been prepared for that. Anyway,
Come on.
I'm terrible at formal things. Absolutely.
You don't have to be
terrible.
formal. Just, be yourself. Perfect.
Okay, so anyway, I want to thank everybody who is attending our EBRALC. Those who are already here and for those who will still be connecting in the next 10 minutes probably. So we're very happy that this is taking place. We really did our best not to skip EBRALC at least. We could not work on ELC, but at least EBRALC. And it seems that people responded very well to it. So we are very happy. And we're going to start with our plenary speaker. I say Ligeia Lugli, and Regiane will pronounce it the English way. And Regiane from UNESP, Professor Regiane will introduce Ligeia. Thank you very much, Ligeia, for accepting our invitation.
Thank you.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. I would like to ask everybody to mute your phones, your microphones, please. I see some people who are not muted. So if you could just turn off your microphone. Desliguem os microfones, por favor, para a gente não ter problema com microfonia, não é? Ok? Well, outra recomendação que nós temos ao longo da palestra, vocês podem colocar as perguntas no chat. Nós ficaremos aqui monitorando, eu, Marina, Estela, estaremos monitorando o chat e colocaremos as perguntas para a Ligeia ao final da palestra, ok? So, it's my very pleasure to introduce Ligeia Lugli for you. She does budget studies and she works with corpus development and corpus lexicography. She is specialized in budget transcript and other low resource languages. She is based at several institutions, including SOAS at the University of London, which stands for School of Oriental African Studies. She's also, she is with the Department Study of Religion. And besides that, she is the head lexicographer at Maglan Research Center in Berkeley, California. She has recently published a Buddhist transcript dictionary. So I'm going to give you the link and you can check it out. Hopefully she's going to introduce us to her dictionary as well. And she is also working on a dictionary of verbalizing Tibetan, right? That's what you said. Okay, well, Ligeia, thank you very much for being here with us, and welcome to Brazil.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everybody for joining me on this online lecture. It's going to be my first online lecture, so please bear with me. And thanks, very special thanks to Rejani for inviting me to speak here. It's a great honor to be able to reach you all around the world. And special thanks to the organizer of this online event that must have been especially challenging given the difficult times we have all been through. So I'm here to talk about the increasing convergence between corpora, corpus dictionaries, and corpus tools. And I would be incredibly grateful if you could allow my screen share so I can show my slides to the audience. So in the meantime, while you do that, I will do, in any case, a little bit of an intro that doesn't require the screen share so we don't waste any time. So given that for many of you, this is going to be a prelude to a very exciting 2 days of learning in the mini cursos that I wish I could attend, but unfortunately they are in Portuguese, so they are a bit beyond me. But for those lucky you that can enjoy the 2 days of learning, I see that there is something for you in store for you about how to build dictionaries, corpus lexicography especially. So I decided to take this on board, this learning aspect of this event. And therefore I gave a little bit more of a didactic spin to this talk than I originally intended. So since there is such a strong corpus linguistic and dictionary element in the mini courses that you are going to attend, I expect, or I perhaps infer, that some of you, hopefully many of you, are going to be interested in developing your own corpus dictionaries. So this is a daunting task to start on a corpus dictionary project. And one of the main factors that will make you a successful corpus lexicographer from scratch is to identify early on in your project what is your plan, especially in regards to how do you conceive the relationship between the corpora you're going to use as source of your dictionary and the dictionary itself. So what I want to do in this talk is to give you some pointers, very general, very rough sketch of some pointers on how to start thinking about the relationship between the corpus you're going to use and the dictionary you want to create, so that you can make the most of both the corpus and the dictionary, no matter what kind of dictionary project you are on. So since some of you may not be super familiar with the terminology and the concept of corpus linguistics and corpus dictionary, I would like to start with some really very, very basic clarifications. So the first one is, what do I mean by corpus dictionary? So here I mean just any dictionary that is whose information is derived from a corpus. And by corpus here I mean just the Rejani?
Excuse me, you're not sharing your screen, could you?
Oh, now I can, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That's perfect. Okay, so how do I do this? Okay, thank you. So for corpus, I adopt the general contemporary corpus linguistic definition. So it's basically any collection of digitized texts that has been somehow pre-processed to allow some linguistic features to be retrievable and analyzable computationally, typically by means of a corpus tool. Now, by means of a corpus tool, I mean just any tool. It could be a tool that you program yourself, or a off-the-shelf ready-made tool. For example, I know that I saw some of the mini corpus will focus on the sketch engine, which is one of the leading corpus tools in the industry. So basically a corpus tool is a tool that allows you to filter and search for information, linguistic information in your corpus, and then analyze it and provide some kind of statistical overview of, for example, the frequency or dispersion of the words in your corpus. So I mentioned that in order for a dictionary to be based on derive this information from the corpus and from this linguistic information to be computationally analyzable, typically the corpus needs to undergo some form of pre-processing. So the most basic and most widespread form of pre-processing are lemmatization and part-of-speech tagging. So in case you're not familiar with this, lemmatization basically is what allows you to search in a corpus through a corpus tool to search for the word go and retrieve all the conjugated instances of the verb like went, going, gone, and so on. Now, part of speech tagging is what allows you to perform slightly more sophisticated searches so that, for example, if you're not interested just in any occurrence of the word go, but you are interested in seeing patterns where the verb go is immediately followed by another verb, then you need the corpus that includes this part of speech tagging that allows you to search for go plus any word that is tagged as a verb. And then you will be able to retrieve all example sentences containing phrases like go figure, go get it, and so on. Now, there are other kinds of pre-processing that you can do. For example, a fairly common one nowadays is dependency parsing. So it's a form of tagging whereby syntactic relations between items in the texts are made explicit. So in this, if you have a dependency parsed corpus, you will be able to also not only retrieve cases of go, but also see what kind of subject does the verb go take or object and so on. Another form of pre-processing that is not so widespread but is very useful is semantic tagging, whereby polysemous words can be queried by their specific sense. So you, instead of just looking for a word, you're looking for a word with a specific meaning instantiation. So this is particularly useful in case of polysemous words, of course. So now some of you may wonder, okay, how is this pre-processing done? So the pre-processing is done computationally or automatically. It's the scope of what is called natural language processing. And this is mostly programming, and nowadays is mostly based on machine learning systems. Now, in order to do corpus linguistics and corpus lexicography, you definitely do not need to be a natural language processing expert. However, it helps to have some basic idea of how this processing works so that you can design your resource from the start with an eye to the possible difficulties that may arise from natural language processing issues. So the main thing I would like, for the sake of this lecture, the main thing I would like you to keep in mind is that most natural language processing systems nowadays are based on machine learning. This means that typically some data needs to be first manually annotated with the kind of linguistic feature you want to tag. And then once sufficient data is being annotated, then you can train a machine learning system algorithm to actually continue the sorry, I got distracted by the messages. Once you have the manually annotated data in a sufficient quantity, you can then use it to train a machine learning model and then continue the annotation automatically. Now, this, of course, means that depending on the language you're interested in and the type of resource you want to create, you may face very different scenario in terms of what is available. Because for many languages, there are already corpora that have been fully pre-processed, or at least there are natural language processing systems that have already been trained on manually annotated data. So you can just basically use those systems to tag your own corpus.
Sorry, Ligeia, you're not changing the slides. We still
Yes,
have
yes, I know. It's not changing.
Okay,
yet.
sorry.
It's still the introduction. Sorry. The slides will come. So the one main thing you need to ask yourself before you start your dictionary project is what kind of resources are available for the type of language that you are going to explore or describe in your resource. Especially, you need to consider whether a fully adequately processed corpus already exists, whether there is a natural language processing pipeline available for you to use, or whether neither of these is the case. So let's make some example. If you set out to create a new dictionary, corpus dictionary for a major contemporary language, let's say you want to do a general dictionary of Brazilian Portuguese, then chances are that there is everything you need already done. So basically what you have to do is to locate, identify a corpus that is suitably pre-processed, lemmatized, post-tag, and with all kinds of information you may require. Download this corpus and then plug it in your favorite corpus analysis tool and start playing with it and do your linguistic analysis. Now, what if you still want to work with a general language, with a contemporary language, a major contemporary language, but instead of wanting to make a general language dictionary, you want to do a domain-specific dictionary. Let's say you are interested in making a dictionary of electronic engineering, for example. Well, in this case, it's possible, maybe even probable, that there isn't a corpus ready-made for you to use, but there are the tools to process that corpus because it's still a major contemporary language. So what you have to do in this case is to locate the text you want to include in your corpus, put them through a natural language processing pipeline or hire a computational linguist to do that for you. And then at the end of it, you will have your pre-processed corpus and you will be able to plug it in your corpus analysis tool and start playing with it. So it's basically only one extra step compared to the scenario we saw before of the general language dictionary. Now, the situation is very, very, very different if what you want to do is a dictionary of a low resource language. For example, many of you may be interested, or at least I hope many of you may be interested in documenting lexicographically one of the many endangered languages that you have in Brazil nowadays. In that case, you are facing a completely different situation. Probably there isn't a huge corpus pre-processed for you, and most likely also there isn't a natural language processing pipeline ready for you to use. So the situation there, it becomes really more complicated in the sense that you don't have the basic pre-processed corpus and it's very difficult to acquire one from the start. So what does this mean? That you should not try to document lexicographically these languages? Absolutely not. In fact, unfortunately, usually the low resource languages that are the most in need of lexicographic descriptions are also the ones where the resources are lacking. And that's why also it's so difficult to create proper lexicographic descriptions of them. So what I want to do in this lecture is to give you an overview of possible development models that you can adopt to go from corpus to dictionary, and also from dictionary to dictionary to corpus, so that you are able to tackle whatever dictionary project you set out for yourself. And because of my personal background in lexicography of low resource historical languages, let's say I will have a bias, or I will emphasize especially the methodologies and the kind of workflow, the developmental workflow that is most suited to tackle problems that originate from dealing with low resource languages, where you don't have a full corpus pre-processed or a natural language pipeline ready for you to use. So what I will do is that I will give you this in a slightly diachronic fashion. However, I want to emphasize that it's not going to be a history of corpus lexicography, which definitely is outside the scope of my expertise. But I think that by looking at the evolution of corpus lexicography, we can get a better sense of the type of challenges that each development method was set out to tackle at the time. So the history of corpus lexicography, luckily for anybody who wants to present it in a diachronic fashion, is extremely brief. In fact, I am slightly older than corpus lexicography. So we find some references to ideas about how to exploit electronic corpus for lexicographic purposes in 1983 in the Journal of the Dictionary Society of North America. And that was about trying to exploit the Brown corpus, which was only 1 million words. So it's extremely, extremely small at that time. Just for a reference, nowadays, for majority languages, you're usually looking at hundreds of millions of words worth of corpora. So it's a completely different order of magnitude we are looking at. The first, probably the first real corpus dictionary was the Kobild English language dictionary, which was published in '87. This is a learner's dictionary, so it's meant for people who want to learn English. And it was revolutionary at the time because it took its examples directly from the corpus without any editing. The corpus they used initially was just under 8 million words, so it was very small, and then it rapidly expanded to, I think, 20 millions, which was still small, but more definitely larger. At the time, they set out some blueprint of a methodology for a workflow of development to go from corpus to dictionary. So the idea was to have a very linear development. The corpus is the source data and the dictionary is the final goal. So we can see this as a linear development. And of course, the bit in the middle is not necessarily a straight line, but is more or less, it has a unique direction. So the idea is that one has a pre-processed corpus, which is probably lemmatized and probably part-of-speech tagged, plugs it in a corpus tool. At the time, the corpus tool was very rudimentary compared to what we have today. In fact, it appears from publications regarding the Kobild project that lexicographers were actually reading printouts of concordance lines. So it's very, very different approach to what we have today with the interactive dynamic corpus analysis tool that we have. But the basic idea was the same kind of lexicographic work, in the sense that the corpus tool would spit out concordances and some kind of frequency or distributional statistics. And then the human lexicographer would read through this data and do some kind of manual analysis of it, and then come out with some kind of findings about the behavior of the word in context, the semantics, etc., and summarize these findings in a nice and neat dictionary entry. Now, the dictionary then becomes more or less an inherent entity, in the sense that surely it undergoes several revisions, probably, especially if it is a contemporary language which keeps evolving, but the bulk of the work, the bulk of the data is done, and it remains there. So this is a very valid way to develop a corpus dictionary. However, there are some shortcomings. So the first shortcoming is kind of methodological, theoretical one. And it was, I think, first highlighted by Michael Randell in 2002. And the idea is that it's not really the most efficient way to go by it, because the tags in the pre-processed corpus are somehow posited a priori before the lexicographic analysis kicks in. So it makes an example of some part-of-speech tagging, which may be revisable after lexicographic analysis. For example, the word core, it suggests, is tagged as a noun, but in fact, if one looks at the corpus, it turns out to behave like an adjective. So we say core theme or core element. Therefore, in the light of this lexicographic analysis, one may decide to revise the tags and therefore go back to the corpus tagging itself after the first linguistic study. So this suggests a form of iteration between the lexicographic analysis and the corpus annotation, the corpus processing itself. So that's for the methodology. Now, what about the feasibility? What kind of projects would benefit from this approach, and what kind of project would probably not benefit from this approach? Well, clearly, you need to have a corpus at the beginning, and probably it's best if you have a pre-processed corpus that is lemmatized and tagged. So if you are dealing with the language that doesn't have a pre-processed corpus and doesn't have a fully developed natural language pipeline, then maybe this approach is not ideal, because also if you're looking at low resource languages, usually also you are on a low budget project, which means that probably you don't want to invest many years and a lot of money into developing the corpus before you can start developing the dictionary. It's kind of a little bit a strange investment of your time if there are alternative ways to go by it. And we'll see that later on. Now, what about the usefulness of this kind of approach? But of course, the final dictionary that you get, this here, it's going to be very valuable for many users, and a lot, if it's done well, it will contain a lot of information. However, surely it will not contain a lot of the information that is actually in the corpus. And the thing that linguists started to realize after using a lot of corpora for lexicographic purposes was that actually there is a little bit of data wasting in the process of lexicographic curation, because, for example, of the many concordance lines one may find in the corpus, only a tiny fraction get actually selected to go in the dictionary entry. So the same goes for all the kind of statistical informations that one may find in the corpus and may not feel that belong in the dictionary, and similarly for concordance, for collocational preferences. So from the mid-2000s, more or less, many lexicographers started to devote some attention on how to present the reaches of the corpora to the end user. So here, because at the time there was also a transition to electronic lexicography, and the dictionary entry was somehow liberated from the constraints of the print, a number of hybrid resources flourished. So these hybrid resources incorporated both a dictionary element and a corpus element, or a corpus tool element. Now, they can be distinguished in two broad categories, those meant for learners and those for a general audience. So those meant for learners developed integrated resources that were highly interactive in many cases, whereby collocational information derived directly from the corpus was used to provide feedback to the learner on how idiomatic a certain pattern of use was. And that was based on the statistical analysis of the corpus. And those apparently, it's really not my area of expertise, but judging from the publications on the subject, it looked like they were very successful hybrid tools. When we come to general language or monolingual resources, the situation is slightly different, and the way they try to bring together, or they did bring together, dictionaries and corpus elements was by creating language portals. So here, the main development model is that based on a corpus, one develops a dictionary. Once the dictionary is in place, it is brought together in some kind of website structure, brought together with a fairly basic corpus tool that allows the user to simultaneously peruse the fully curated dictionary entry and some concordances or statistics derived from the corpus. So this enriches basically the information that the user can see. Now, in terms of shortcomings of this model, we can see that there is, because the model is basically an evolution or a step on top of the linear model that we saw before, basically it inherited the problems that were inherent in the first linear model. So the main problem is that, methodologically speaking, there is no cross-pollination between the dictionary and the corpus. Once the dictionary is created, is put online, and then is put side by side to the corpus. It doesn't necessarily mean that new information from the corpus, from the dictionary, is fed back into the corpus itself. Now, in terms of feasibility, again, it inherits the problems inherent in the first linear model, and it adds a little bit more, because now not only we need to have a fully processed corpus beforehand, we also need to have a dictionary, so, or many dictionaries. So this is really a very good model of dictionary development or resource development for people that are working with very high resource languages. So for example, if you set out to create a general language dictionary of a contemporary language because you are dissatisfied with some of the information in some of the dictionaries and you think that perhaps a corpus could add some new information, then perhaps this is an effective solution for you. Instead of starting a new dictionary from scratch, you can gather all the existing dictionary for the language in a portal and put it side by side some well-designed corpus analysis tools so that the user can retrieve extra information from the corpus directly. Clearly, this is not the way to go if you're working with a low resource language for which you don't have the corpus and you don't have the dictionary added, right? Now, in terms of usefulness, there is a clear improvement, especially for the learner's dictionary, where these resources that integrated corpus data with dictionary data were used interactively to improve the production of language. They can also be very useful for non-learner, for general language user. However, there are some limitations that are basically dependent on what kind of information is encoded in the corpus in the first place. For example, if a user is looking up a word in this language portal, he will have the option to see the entry in the dictionary and to see the concordance lines from a corpus tool. Now, usually, a user will be particularly interested in a meaning, in a specific sense of the word, not just in the all senses. And he may want to refer to the concordances to see more examples of a certain word in a certain meaning. However, unless this information is encoded in the corpus, the semantic information is encoded in the corpus, or unless the corpus tool also sorts out the concordances by doing some form of automatic word sense discrimination, the user will be faced with a wall of concordance lines that are not sorted by meaning and therefore will probably not find the kind of examples that he wants to find. So it is very important to understand that the usefulness of this kind of hybridization is just basically a result of what kind of information is encoded in the corpus in the first place. And this is not only the case for word senses. It is, in fact, any kind of linguistic information may be encoded in the corpus itself. And then once it's encoded in the corpus, it can be retrievable and analyzable using, for example, corpus tools. This realization was the focus of the late 2000s in the lexicographic community, where there was a marked shift from the goal of the lexicographic enterprise being just the dictionary to the goal being the encoding of lexicographically curated annotation in some kind of linguistic data set. Could be the corpus itself or a subset of the corpus or a lexical database, depending on the projects. Now, one particularly interesting case, I think it's the DICO-Info dictionary, which is originated as a project inspired, I think, by frame semantics. And it was originally not a dictionary project. So the goal was not to create a dictionary, but was to create a data set that contained linguistical annotation that would allow analysis of frame semantics. So basically they wanted to annotate a semantic role in a sentence and syntactic roles in the sentence and see how they interacted. As they produced this data set, then they realized that they were actually encoding basically dictionary information, dictionary-like information. So they were encoding the meaning, they were encoding the syntactic relations, and therefore they decided to use the data set to create a dictionary. And this is a very important point. So once you have your linguistic data tidily annotated in a very systematic manner, either in the form of a database or a data set or an annotated corpus with multi-layer of annotations, then you can very easily produce a dictionary from that. You don't necessarily need to have an extra layer of curation on top of your lexicographic annotation to be able to publish the dictionary. You can just publish the data set with some filtering options. So basically, the idea is that the moment you start to encode the lexicographically curated data directly in the corpus, then the boundary between a dictionary display and a corpus tool starts to blur, because you can use the corpus tool to query the annotated lexicographic data directly in the corpus. So many of the projects that took this approach, so they moved away from the dictionary as the ultimate goal to the ultimate goal of lexicographic analysis being the fine-grained annotation of linguistic features in a data set or a corpus or a database. They were often strongly motivated by the desire to improve natural language processing. So we mentioned at the very beginning that in order for to create automatic annotation systems, one usually needs a fairly big amount of data manually annotated. And then these manually annotated data may serve as the basis for a training system, for a machine learning system. So the idea was that by encoding the linguistic feature in the corpus, one would then be able to do at the same time to create a data set that they could use for linguistic analysis, and also created a training set to then do the annotation on a larger scale automatically. And this is an important point because it means that at this point, the lexicographic annotation becomes the driver of corpus processing. So we don't necessarily need to have the corpus perfectly processed at the beginning of our project, but we can actually create it as we go along. Now, this can be useful for a number of things. As we saw, the majority or many of these projects that have taken this kind of approach to the corpus dictionary development were dealing with major contemporary languages, so languages that are already high resources. However, they wanted to automate or to create a different, finer grained layer of annotation. They wanted to do verbalency, they wanted to do a corpus pattern analysis or frame semantics. Therefore, they needed an annotation, kind of annotation that is not available yet through normal natural language processing pipelines. But this is especially useful if we are dealing with a low resource language for which we don't have a natural language pipeline at all, because then we can start more or less from scratch and develop the dictionary and the corpus at the same time. So here we come to what I call the iterative model of corpus dictionary development. So you see that this graph looks really different from the rest, especially because it is now a cycle. So the basic idea is that you start with a corpus. Let's say for now that this is a corpus that has been regularly pre-processed, so it's the usual lemmatized and part-of-speech tag corpus. You start with it, you pipe it through your corpus tool, and you do some analysis, you retrieve your concordance lines, you retrieve your statistics, and then based on that, you do your lexicographic curation. Now, in the linear model, then from the lexicographic curation, you then would then go and write a dictionary entry with your findings. Now, in this model, instead of going and write a dictionary entry, you actually encode the result of your curation inside the corpus or the data set as a layer of annotation. So let's say at this point, you want to add semantic annotation. Well, that's a big part of the lexicographic curation is deciding which meaning a word has, which sense a word has, and where this meaning is instantiated. So you start by looking at the concordance lines and assigning a sense tag to the concordances you're reading. And as you go through, you actually tag this concordance line in a certain way. So at the end of this process, you will find yourself with a new corpus, which is of course a subset of the huge corpus you initially chose, because maybe you decided to annotate, let's say 10% of all the concordances available, or a set number, let's say 200 citation for each word, whichever method you decide to use for your sampling. But surely it's going to be a sub-sample of your corpus. Then once you have this with this new lexicographically curated layer of annotation, you can use your annotation to then train a machine learning system to do the rest of the annotation automatically, if that is possible for the kind of annotation you're doing. Or more simply, you can use the manually annotated subset, pipe it again through the corpus tool, and then go for another round of analysis. So for example, now instead of just querying a certain word and perhaps a certain word in a certain pattern of grammatical part-of-speech tags, you can also look for concordancy of a certain word with a certain meaning. And then you can go on and annotate a new layer, for example, by annotating the semantic prosody of that word in that specific meaning, and so on. You can go on cyclically adding more and more information. Now, the really interesting aspect for dictionary development is that the dictionary at this point is outside of the cycle. It's a byproduct of your annotation. So at any stage, after the first round of lexicographic curation, so once you have started to add some kind of lexicographic curation to your data, then you have a data set that basically contains dictionary data. And all you need to do is just to find a system to display this dictionary data to your audience. Now, there are, of course, shortcomings in this model, as there are shortcomings in every possible model. So first, methodologically, well, we now have taken care of the first problem, which was that the corpus pre-processing, the tags were kind of given assigned a priori before any linguistic analysis occurred. So now, because it's iterative, we can actually go and refine our tags in the light of our lexicographic curation. So that's taken care of. However, now there is the problem that there is a risk, if we're not very careful, to kind of muddle the corpus data with our own interpretative notions and ideas about the corpus and the meaning of words. Now, obviously, there is nothing really objective about corpus linguistics, because in the end, the very definition of word is not so clear-cut. So everything has some degree of subjectivity. However, many aspects of corpus linguistics have a very strong consensus. So for example, for most languages, the part of speech tagging has a strong consensus. Nobody would actually object to the fact that the verb is a verb for many languages. So that's kind of okay. However, when we come to word senses, well, it becomes a bit more slippery. Maybe two different annotators would assign two different senses to the same word instantiation, because maybe it's vague or there are no clear criterion on how to assign a semantic label to a word. And then there are other instances where really there are so many factors influencing the annotation that it becomes extremely project specific. For example, for some forms of semantic typing, it really depends what kind of tag set one uses. So it is very important for the project to remain meaningful that the annotation is clearly demarcated. So it's clear for people that are going to use your data set which parts of the annotations are more or less stable and agreed upon, and which parts of the annotation are more subjective and maybe project specific. Also, it could be good practice to add some kind of uncertainty label to assign a level of certainty or uncertainty to the confidence of the annotator. If one has to assign a semantic tag, but is not quite clear what is the meaning of the word in a certain context, of course, this needs to be marked. So the data is not wasted, it's there, it's available, but is also very clear what the data stands for and how reliable it is for a different kind of analysis. Now we come to the feasibility bit. So this picture is quite different from what we saw so far. So if the previous linear model and hybrid model were favoring high resource languages, this model actually doesn't necessarily favor high resource languages, which is in a way is nice because it kind of bridges the gap a little bit between this disparity between languages that are high resources and languages that are low resources, but at the same time, it poses another set of problems. So the main issue to consider here before you start on the iterative model of corpus development, corpus and dictionary development, is to understand that only a tiny amount of data can be manually annotated because it's so time consuming to do it. So it is important to understand whether your goal is to then develop a machine learning system that will use your manual annotation and go and try to automate the annotation, or whether you're just interested in having a very small sample that is very highly curated and manually annotated. So that's the first thing you need to consider. The second thing you need to consider is how meaningful is it going to be, and how feasible is it going to be to actually go from manual to automated system. And this really depends on the kind of project you are dealing with. So if you're working with a general language, towards a general language dictionary project, then this may not work, because realistically in the general language, words will have, let's say you're interested in semantic tagging. Realistically, in general language, a word will have very many meanings. And then you will have to annotate only a tiny portion of the available concordance lines because you don't have much time. And therefore, chances are that you will end up with very few examples of some meanings. And this example will not be enough to generalize to the full language, and they will not be enough to train a machine learning system. Conversely, if you are looking at the domain-specific kind of dictionary, then the situation is very different. If you want to do the electrical engineering dictionary, then probably the words will not be so polysemous. You will encounter the same words in the same set of meanings. And therefore, with the same amount of manually annotated data, you may be able to actually achieve enough data consistency in the data to train a model and also to make a meaningful, statistically meaningful results with your analysis. So it's very important that you clarify yourself or what exactly you want to achieve with your dictionary, what kind of corpus do you need to build. Now we go to the usefulness. Well, I think it's extremely useful to adopt an iterative model, especially if you're looking at a low resource language, because really it's unrealistic to think that you can develop from scratch a natural language processing system, pre-process the corpus and do the dictionary in a time framework that is, let's say, allowable with a usual grant cycle budget. So this allows you to start working on the dictionary immediately, and at the same time create as an output also a corpus that is processed, if not entirely, at least in part. Now, one of the most exciting development of possibilities of encoding your linguistic annotations directly in the corpus is also that you, the dictionary data then becomes explorable in the same way as any other data or corpus data can be. And one of the most, I think one of the most pleasing and enticing development of corpus analysis tool recently has been the integration of data visualizations. Data visualization allow to capture the essence of the trend that is embedded in your corpus data visually in a very catchy and often, not always, but often intuitive manner. So if you encode the linguistic annotation in your data set, then the data set can be explored and can be actually rendered as via data visualization. So I don't have time to go into the data visualization that are available today in corpus tools or in hybrid dictionary and corpus tools, but I do advise any of you that are interested in this kind of stuff to check out especially Lanxbox, which is a corpus tool that has been published recently at the University of Lancaster in the UK, and they offer very nice data visualization for corpora, and you can upload your own corpus to see it. But what I want to show you is what happens if you have created an annotated data set and then you want to display it as a dictionary. So, of course, the traditional idea is that then you will need some kind of extra curation to transform your data set into a readable entry for a human reader. And also you may want to have some kind of sophisticated platform that creates an interface for the general user to use your dictionary. And this is all very good. However, if you're working with languages that are already low resource and low budget, you probably would prefer to put your effort, to concentrate your effort on doing as much annotation as possible so that you have more data rather than diverting your few resources into creating a fully curated dictionary entry with a nice dictionary website. Although that's, if you have the resources to do so, by all means, go for it. But, in my experience, it's often the case that it's better to be very conservative with resources. So one aspect that you can do is to use R, which is a programming language that probably many of you are familiar with. And if you're not familiar with, please do follow the mini corso by Gustavo, which I think is going to be great. And you will learn the basics of R. So R is a programming language that was usually originally used mostly for statistical computing, but has a number of different applications. And one of the many things it can do very well, because it has a statistical background, is to generate data visualization. And there are packages that are free and open sources whereby you can use are also to generate interactive application and deploy them online. So I would like to show very briefly 2 projects that I've done on extremely low resource. Well, one is an extremely low resource language, which is a Buddhist Sanskrit. So basically Buddhist Sanskrit is a form of Sanskrit that is used for Buddhist literature, and I used my corpus as a corpus that spans the first millennium of the Common Era, more or less. And because we didn't have any natural language processing infrastructure, we actually had to start really from scratch and develop the entire pipeline and manual annotations ourselves. So this is the result. It's still a work in progress, and this is part of the beauty of using a data set as your interface, basically, for a dictionary, is that you can keep building on it and keep create it. So this is a dictionary that is completely automatically generated from the data set. There is no human curation at this stage yet. We do plan to put in some human curation, but only after we have annotated more data. So here you can see you have the basic sense discrimination that you would find in a dictionary. In this case, it's in graphic form, because as the name suggests, this is a visual dictionary. So everything is done through data visualization. So this is what we call the semantic tree. It gives you there is the lemma as sankalpa, and here is the kind of conceptual domain it lexicalizes, which is the domains of thought and will. And here are the senses we have identified. One is thought, the other is intention. And then each of the 2 senses is then ramifies, branches out into some sub-senses. Now, if we want to see more about this lemma, we can look at examples here. And then we get the examples together with, if we want, we have translations. And then, as I said, in many cases, there are some interpretive difficulties. So we can also include uncertain citations and so on. And then we can explore it.
For the dictionary, we don't see the slide.
Yeah, we are not seeing the dictionary.
No.
You are not seeing the dictionary. Okay, sorry. I think now you see it.
Just place the dictionary at the screen you are sharing with us.
But that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, well, for some reason, the slide still shows.
Okay, what if I close the slides? Wait a second.
Yeah, perhaps.
Sorry.
That's okay, yeah.
Maybe I try a new screen share.
Yeah, let's see if it works. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, okay. Sorry for that.
Sorry,
so
can you just go back a little bit on
yes. Sorry. So this is the dictionary.
That's okay. I'm sorry. I should.
Yeah.
Have...
No. Thank you for letting me know. Then. Yeah, this is the dictionary. Then if we want to see the general senses of a lemma, when we select the lemma here, and here it's the lemma is sankalpa, then we can see here it's the conceptual fields it lexicalizes, which is thought and will. Here are the senses that we have identified, which is thought and intention, and these are the sub-senses that we can identify. Now we can also make the node size proportional to frequency, so we have an idea of how it distributes in the literature. And then we can see the examples, which is basically normal concordance lines, and the translation of the example is here. And then if we want to look, we can also, we can do many things. We can see word clouds, etc. I mean, once you have the data in the data set, it's very easy to display it in whichever way you want, basically. So feel free to explore the possibilities of dictionary on your own. I understand that Sanskrit may not be the first language of many of you, but maybe you can just abstract from the language content and just see the possible features. Then one thing that is possible to do is to explore in a more kind of descriptive statistic way. So for example, if I want to see the subsense, how the connotation is, I can then see that this particular word doesn't have, for example, a positive connotation when it means thinking with desire or wish, which of course is in line with Buddhist philosophy, that desire is not a very good thing. And then I can also check what is the distribution of the senses, for example, by text type or by philosophical tradition and so on. There are many ways I can slice the analysis and the visualization. Now, one thing that is important to note is that because everything is generated directly from the data set, then there is no need anymore to distinguish between a dictionary and a thesaurus. The same data set can also generate a thesaurus view, whereby we, instead of looking for a word, we look for a semantic domain. And then we can see how the domain is lexicalized, and we can again, we can compare words if we want. For example, we given a certain domain, we may want to decide that we want to check, for example, Sankalpa. And the Sankalpa is not a very good one. Okay, so for example, these two, and then we can look at how they compare with one another, and we can also check different examples that illustrate how these words are used in context. So basically, there are very many things we can do once we have the data set. Now, very quickly, in case you wonder whether a different kind of dictionary may also benefit from this kind of I will stop the screen sharing and redo it, because I'm going to show you something else. So there is another dictionary I've created, which is a verbalency dictionary of Tibetan. And in this case, we are not annotating for sense, and we're not creating a thesaurus, but rather we are annotating for argument structure of a verb. So whether a verb or when a verb takes a direct object, an indirect object, a subject, and so on. So in this case, again, we had to annotate the corpus from scratch, because while there are corpora, no, I don't think you're seeing the right screen. How do I do this? Stop share. So are you seeing something written in characters that are not Latin? Yeah? Okay. So
Yes.
Yes.
yeah, okay, good. So this is the Tibetan verbalency. And in this case, what we show is the argument structures. So it's and the sources in which it occurs. So this, it at the moment it's really just a demo version. It's not online yet because we are still working on it. At the moment it's just a proof of concept of how to show the data from a mini corpus we have put together. But the good thing is that again, we have the examples, and then there are links that you probably are not going to be able to see because it's going to change the page. Are you seeing it? Maybe. So there are links directly to the corpus itself.
No, we are not.
Right? And then there are senses taken from a different dictionary. So in this case, we are not tagging the senses directly in the corpus, but we are using senses that are already available. And then we are linking the senses to an external resource, which is a valency pattern bank that shows how the equivalent in English, in this case is the verb to read, how its valency is expressed in the English language, so that one can contrast the English with the Tibetan. And then at some point, we will want to assign for each argument structure, we will want to match it to a specific sense. So I'm not sure we will be able to do this in the scope of the present project. However, because we have everything tidily annotated in basically as a layer of corpus annotation, it's going to be very easy then to do a second iteration and add the semantic annotation so that the dictionary will then display also the senses. So basically the bottom line of all this is that if you're working with a low resource language and you want to create a corpus dictionary, but you don't have a pre-processed corpus yet, and you don't have the natural language processing tools to quickly pre-process the corpus, what you can do is to iteratively develop the corpus and the dictionary, and then you will be able to generate outputs all the step of the way, no matter how long it will take to generate the final dictionary. So this is all my contribution for today. I thank you very much for your attention. And please do ask me questions. If there are some few minutes for question now, I will be happy to reply as I can. But also please do email me if you have a question comes to your mind next week. Don't worry, email me. You should have my email. In case you don't, is LL, so the initials of my name, ll34@soas.ac.uk. So thank you very much.
Okay, Ligeia, well, thank you. You can stop sharing. And we will be very glad to see your new dictionary as soon as it is done, right? Let's keep in touch and make sure all of us have access to it. I'm going to invite questions. We do not, oh, there is a question. Elisa wants to make a question, so I think you can go ahead, Elisa.
Good morning. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was wonderful, very enlightening for me. I've been working with the corpus and dictionary making for a while. And one question I have for you is, this model that you present is really fascinating, and I've been seeing it, you know, different realizations of this visualizing data visualizing concept. But one thing for me, being an older person, is it's very hard for me to get the computational knowledge to actually put this in practice. And I feel just waste, because I have a lot of terminological and lexicological knowledge, but I just cannot program. I can't. I'm sorry, I can't. I've been trying to work with Python, and I'm gonna take the R course, and I've studied R before, but it's just too much for me. So nowadays, how do you cope with this gap between what you know and how to put that into the corpus using, because you said, oh, you can manually and tag every sense, and how do I do that? Just, yeah. I don't have like a tool that I can just, okay, I want to tag this with the different sense. Can I just click and type? Blah. Right. No, I don't.
No, it's a great oh my God. Question, and I'm sure we've all been there. We've all been there. So there are a number of things you can do. So one thing you can do is to use a annotation tool that is already available. So there are a ton of annotation tools. However, they are not all user-friendly. I mean, they don't require computational skills, but still you have to read through the documentation because it depends on the tool, of course, but mostly being developed using grants. So of course there wasn't a huge budget to create something as user-friendly as Google, let's say, right? So obviously, you will have to read through the documentation, look exactly how it works, upload your tag set, which is also, you have to think, what is my tag set, etc. So that is one way to do it. It's not going to be particularly easy. Another way to
Can you name like one or two that you would recommend for someone?
I am not perhaps most up to date with what is available right now, but there used to be, well, one is BRAT. BRAT, yes, like BRAT. So that's very nice. It has a very nice interface. Huh?
Could you type that on the chat?
BRAT. Okay, so it's like this. So I can perhaps show you. Yeah, it's like that. I can show you what it looks like. So can you see it? This is for Tibetan.
Ah.
And yeah, so here, well, I'm not logged in, so I cannot actually do the annotation. But basically how it works is that if I want to annotate this particular thing, I will get a menu where basically I select what's the lemma, what's the evolution or the tense, etc. So I put it there. Of course, it needs to be configured, and I will not lie to you, it's not easy to configure. So you may want to, for instance, refer to IT for them to configure the server for you or something like that. So this is one. Then there is one used to be popular, was Annie, I think it was called.
Annie.
Notation tool, or maybe, I'm not sure this is it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, another one was Esmeralda. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, this one, Esmeralda, sorry. So let's see if I can copy the link in the chat. So there are tools available out there where you can do that. Another possibility is that you team up with someone who is able to program. Now, there are many different approaches, and mostly depends on your budget, whether you're going for a large grant, whether it's your private project, etc. So one way to do it would be to team up, for example, with the digital humanities department at your institution. And then you can design the annotation tool together. One thing that I don't particularly recommend is to work with an engineer, professional software engineer. There are two reasons why I don't recommend it. I mean, professional software engineers are amazing. They do really, really incredible stuff. The thing is, they are very costly. So the majority of your budget is going to go just into that. And then, of course, you want some money for doing the actual linguistic work, which should be the core of the project, right? So that's one thing. And the other is that sometimes it's very difficult to communicate across disciplines. So whereas the digital humanities department may have a common language with you, the professional software engineer doesn't. Most of the time, he just doesn't understand exactly what's the purpose of it. And, then they don't particularly like when you change your mind halfway through. And I can assure you, you are going to change your mind 20 times halfway through. So that maybe is not the best use of your budget. Then another possibility, and I know you're going to say no, but you should take it on board, is to learn to program. It's much easier than you think. And one thing I experience is that sometimes it's very difficult if you just take a course that is meant for, I don't know, people that want to develop online gaming. You really don't care about it. So it's difficult to get engaged. But if you have your own project and you say, okay, I want to develop an annotation tool, and you have a design in your mind and you want to realize it, then it's becoming much more easy. So I will give you an inspirational story, which is unfortunately about myself. So I don't really want to make it as, wow, you should emulate myself, I'm such a hero, not at all. But it's just, I wasn't able to program. I don't have a technical background at all. And then I got frustrated with the engineer on my team. And it was very expensive. It was very difficult to communicate. It was a nightmare. So at some point, I was using R just, for analysis, really, not for programming. And then I started thinking, well, if I do this, maybe I can get that result. If I do, and little by little, in the course of 2 years, I actually developed my own annotation tools, my own dictionary platform, etc. So it's definitely possible.
You now gave me some hope. I'm about to go on a postdoc, and maybe in 1 year I can start doing something. But I have to tell you, programmers, they are not interested at all in our projects, at least in Brazil. So we have to have a way to team up with people that actually do the same thing as we do. And we also don't have money. The government doesn't care about humanities in Brazil, unfortunately. So yeah, we have to find a way to, even create those tools to allow people that are not really available to learn programming, that still can use their lexicographical knowledge. And thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. We have another question, and Elisa, well, join the club, right, Ligeia? She knows how hard, it has been for me to, to move on with my dictionary in terms of making it digital, right? It's all from the scratch, it's all manual. And Ligeia has fortunately called my attention to change things, right? To come to a new process and procedure. So I appreciate and thank you. Our question comes from Adriano Ferraresi, who is also our guest speaker for tomorrow. And he says he has a question that might be relevant for other minority language projects. He says, oh, by the way, he's following us on YouTube.
Ah, okay.
What kind of texts make up your corpus of Sanskrit? And where and how you obtain them, like digitalized books or the web. Okay, are you okay?
Okay.
Okay.
So, Adriano, grazie per la domanda. Thank you for your question. And okay, so my own corpus is fairly straightforward in the sense that we had very low budget, so we didn't engage in much in terms of new digitization of text, which of course is a possibility. Entails some other problems in terms of OCRing, etc., especially with if one wants to work directly for manuscript, it can be quite tricky to automatically OCR text. But in my case, because we wanted to create an infrastructure that is robust enough to be sustainable. And then once we have the infrastructure ready, we can, of course, put more text in the corpus, etc. So what we've done is that we have taken as corpus every Buddhist text in Sanskrit that is available already digitized in a repository of Indic text online, which is called Gretil and is hosted by the University of Göttingen. The one thing that we needed to do was to add the metadata to make the analysis, of course, more interesting. So we had to come up with our metadata tag set and label the text one by one. And also, and this is specific for Buddhist Sanskrit, I don't know if it's a problem that other historical languages have, but in the case of Buddhist Sanskrit, unfortunately, well, maybe not unfortunately, but it's a fact, there are many reconstructions that are actually back translations from Tibetan into Sanskrit. And that has been, of course, motivated by the idea of recreating the word of the Buddha out of mostly religious purposes. Or religious concerns. So of course you cannot put in a dictionary, in a corpus, a text that is a reconstruction, no matter how carefully reconstructed the text is. And therefore we had to weed out from the Gretil collection all the texts that have been reconstructed. Now, once we've got those plain texts, then I created a lemmatizer that is rule-based specifically for Buddhist Sanskrit literature. And then as we go through the lexicographic annotation of the text, we also proofread the automated lemmatization and segmentation of the text. So that's basically what we did. In terms of copyright issues that I understand were also part of your question, was that we had an agreement with Gretil, so this repository of Indic text, that we could reuse their text and generate some derivative form of the text, because of course we lemmatize and segment the text, so is a derivative output. So we got the agreement from them, and then hopefully we are safe. Now obviously there is a big concern about the copyright holder of the original print edition, and that's a bit more of a gray area. So my understanding is that as historical artifacts, historical texts are free from copyright because the authors have died a long time ago. But of course, the copyright holder of the edition that the digitized version is based on may have some claims to the text. Now, of course, once you have the plain text version and it's being processed, lemmatized, etc., then you lose most of the editorial input because you don't have footnotes, you don't have punctuation, etc. But still, they have read the manuscript, so there is some of their work there, and this is a thorny matter. Now, in my experience, scholars are usually very happy to have their edition used for corpus building purposes, but I cannot guarantee that this is the legally safe strategy to adopt.
Okay, all right. I'm afraid that was our last question because we are running out of time. And well, I just want to thank you for bringing this new perspective, which you have already done with me. Now we are in a whole group, right? And understanding that there is this way of making dictionaries, right? You integrate with doing, also making a corpus out of it, right? So you expand the capabilities of the dictionary itself. And so that's wonderful. I would like to thank the audience and also say that you have to keep track of our program, right? We have a whole schedule for today with the mini courses and all. So thank you again, Ligeia. It was a great pleasure having you with us. Hope you can join us for, our mini courses and all. Stella, is there anything you want to say?
Oh, I just want to thank Ligeia again. And maybe you want to mention that you have an agreement that you may be coming next year.
Yes, of course.
Yes, so
Yes.
maybe people who are interested, I don't know exactly what your program is, but that would be great. So to have you and expand on whatever you're doing right now and your projects. Okay.
Yes,
So
thank you for giving me this opportunity. Actually, if the audience is interested in in learning a specific technique or a specific programming skill, please do email with suggestion for the course, because the program is still in the making, so I can definitely tailor it for specific purposes if needed.
Yes, thanks for reminding us, Stella. Dr. Odair Nadim, professor in Araraquara, and we are bringing, we have the pleasure of bringing Ligeia next year. She's coming for a workshop during 15 days in Araraquara, at pós-graduação de Linguística e Língua Portuguesa. So we will welcome some ideas for the workshop and also some lectures, because she's coming through the Capstreet program, which allows us not only for courses, but also for some lectures. So, well, hopefully she is coming to Brazil, right? Because we hope this whole situation comes to an end, right? So again, thank you, and thank you, Stella, for everything. Thank you, Marina, Elaine, everybody who's there in the background. Okay.
thank you, Ligeia.
Thank you. Bye.
Wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you. You too.